Welcome to the Real Comic Heroes Podcast. Your adventure into the world of comic book movies starts here.
Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another adventure of the Real Comic Heroes Podcast. My name is Travis from Watchmen Minute.
And I'm Patrick, with special guest.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy Nelson with Marvel Movie Minute and the Next Real Film Podcast.
Good to have you.
Thanks, it's exciting to be here.
Patrick, were you aware that there was someone insane enough to take on all 23 so far Marvel movies 1 minute at a time?
Yeah, Travis, you were just telling me about that, and that seems like it would take literally an eternity to get through that.
Yes, it really feels that way. I just don't think about it.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to move forward. I think we're like, okay, let's just get through phase one. We can do phase one, and then we'll look at phase two.
Yeah.
We don't have to look at this massive thing.
Phase one's pretty daunting on its own. I figure you'll be, 68, 70 by the time you wrap that one up?
Luckily, it's only 6 films, and we're done with one. So we got 5 more years of that one.
Aren't they like 3-4 hours each or something? I don't know.
By the time we get to the Avengers, that's going to be that's a beefy one.
Yeah. Well, Godspeed.
Thank you. Yeah, it's we're getting ready for the Incredible Hulk right now, which is a lot of people's least favorite film of the MCU. So it's going to be an interesting one to talk about and look at. So
that one's got a lot of good parts for me. So
yeah, I enjoy it, and I'm excited to kind of look at it again and talk about it in a lot more depth to see really what's what's working and what's not, and why it is the whipping boy for the whole franchise.
Yeah.
So is that the Ang Lee, Edward Norton?
You're blending
it is the
two.
Edward Norton.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm blending. Yeah, I know there's two in it.
There was the Ang Lee, Eric Bana Hulk movie that came out in 2003.
Right.
Gotcha.
This is Louis Leterrier's film with Edward Norton.
Okay.
And the Abomination.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I could not. I probably blended both movies together in my head. I honestly don't remember watching them.
Yeah.
I know I did, but
well, you're probably not the only person who feels that way, so
wow.
Yeah, it'll be fun though. I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about with that character because he's so rage-filled and I guess to that end, an interesting connection to this particular character we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that character today is the Punisher.
Is it?
It is.
Oh, okay. It must have been the dark hair and the weird facial hair that made him into
it's
the
his
Punisher.
skull-shaped, face kind of
Makeup
pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and his knife that lets you know too.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. The knife with the skull head on the end.
Yeah. And, everyone calling him Punisher every 5 seconds at the beginning of this film.
Right.
Patrick, you got any taglines?
Taglines. What? Taglines. I'm not gonna. Do I really want to read all these? There's 2.
All of these.
Okay, here we go. The Punisher. If society won't if society won't punish the guilty, he will.
That one totally works for me.
That makes sense.
It fits.
The Punisher. Judge, jury, executioner. All in a day's work. Kind of kitschy.
Sounds like Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
And that's I think the Punisher's a good enough tagline. The Punisher.
Yeah.
The Punisher.
So let's go around. Let's talk about history with the Punisher. Andy, why don't you start with either this movie or just the Punisher in general?
Yeah, sure. The Punisher was a a character I never read the comics for, the specific comics of his own. It was not the sort of comic I was looking for when I was reading comics. My familiarity with him came in kind of his guest appearances in Spider-Man. Like that's really kind of where I started becoming familiar with this character, and obviously he's the sort of character that draws people to want to wear a shirt that has kind of the big skull on it. And so I was, even outside of the comic, I was just familiar of the bigger universe of this character because of that kind of brand of marketing. And so I always knew he was out there. I just wasn't reading like the real violent sort of comics. And I don't think like this was one of those movies that I skipped at the time because it looked like kind of the sort of action movie that generally I was skipping, Dolph Lundgren type of movies. I wasn't watching many Dolph Lundgren movies. And I know it's funny because he had kind of, with Rocky IV and everything, come into kind of the culture as far as a new action star. But I wasn't watching the Rocky movies either. I finally just watched all the Rocky movies for our podcast earlier this year. And so I kind of skipped all of that. And my first experience watching any Punisher property was actually the Thomas Jane version. And because of that, I was like, I just don't want to watch any more of The Punisher because that was just a real terrible film. Yeah. I just think of like the silly opera scene, and there was so much silliness in that movie. I just really didn't dig it. And then when I think it was Ray Stevenson's version came out, I saw the trailer and I skipped it because it just didn't look like, I was like, okay, it's more of that character. But, I don't know. I heard later that was a one worth going back to. And so I'm still curious about it because I hear that they kind of get the character a little more right as far as kind of the level of violence and everything. Mm-hmm. And then with the Netflix shows, I really have started enjoying those. I just haven't gotten to the point where the Punisher has been introduced. So I really need to kind of amp up. And only recently did I finally watch the Dolph Lundgren version, which is what we're talking about tonight. Because I was on a panel at our local Comic-Con where we were talking about kind of the evolution of kind of comic book heroes and franchises leading to the MCU. And so I watched it and I was like, God, this movie is really not that great. But then I rewatched it for the podcast. I'm like, you know what? Okay, it's not that great, but there's actually some fun stuff with it. And I think it's kind of an interesting movie to look at and to talk about today, especially in context of everything else. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting kind of way that I came to this film, and even some of the comics, because I've read a few of the initial line of the Punisher comics that I think started in the 80s. And so, it's been kind of that sort of journey for me, but it's a character that I do think is actually pretty interesting. So it's somebody that I want to learn more about and see more of.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always liked the Punisher. He's for me, as far as the comics go, he has been one of the most dependable Marvel characters. Not like dependable as in Frank Castle is a dependable guy. Just the character of the Punisher. Like you can always, pretty much pick up a Punisher comic because they're always relaunching that book. There's so many like Punisher #1, so many volumes because they just keep relaunching it. But there are some really good runs in the late 90s and the early 2000s, mid 2000s. There's some good Punisher runs, and he's just been one of my favorite characters. Probably like maybe not top 5, maybe top 10. I'm almost always having the Punisher pulled from my local comic book store. And I think he just works as a character because Frank Castle doesn't have to be deep and interesting, and like he's just the Punisher. He just kind of how he's going to react, but then he can surprise you. He'll get himself arrested just so that he can go into jail and kill a mob boss, because that's his plan, and then he's going to escape from jail. So there are always some really fun stories with the Punisher. So Going back to the movies, like I didn't see this one until it was probably about a 10-year-old movie. Somewhere in the late 90s, I saw this just, on TV. I think the Sci-Fi Channel would run like a themed week of comic book movies at that point. And even seeing it then, it felt like a really old movie, even though it must have only been within 10 years old, which seems really weird. And then I probably revisited it once again in my 20s. So I think like every 10 years I revisit this film, and this is like it felt kind of new watching it for this, just because a lot of it I didn't remember and hadn't really stuck with me. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this movie. I'll get into it in my notes, but kind of what really worked for me in this one. And yeah.
Cool.
Patrick, what about you?
Yeah, this is the first time watching this bad boy.
Yeah, I kind of figured.
Yeah. But, I'm familiar with 80s, 90s action movies, so
yeah,
this character fits right into that big action boom of that era.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen it done better, because this is basically just like a revenge story that you get in this movie.
Sure.
Taking any backstories from comic books or anything like that, but just as a movie on its own, I mean, it's pretty standard action movie fare. As far as the character goes, it's almost like it makes me think of what's his face, the movie's Death Wish, not the Bruce Willis version.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Charles Bronson.
Yeah, Charles Bronson.
And it gives me that like kind of, I don't know if it is or not, but it makes me think of like some of those movies in New York where the crime's taken over and there's one guy that just can't handle it anymore and he's gonna do something about it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the Punisher to me.
I think that's kind of how the Punisher was created. He first showed up in Amazing Spider-Man, and I think as a response to the Charles Bronson type characters, the early 70s, movies and things like that, and the violence in New York, and so yeah, that's definitely just it's the classic story of the Punisher. It's just a revenge story. His family's killed, and he decides to take it out against organized crime. So.
Yeah, it really does seem like it was born out of kind of that gritty 70s of New York and just kind of even 70s cinema. And it's interesting because it feels like this film almost could have fit better in the 70s than I mean, I guess with Dolph Lundgren and kind of the 80s action movies and everything, it still fits there, but it really still, I felt, has some of those 70s sensibilities, which is pretty interesting. And maybe it is just that revenge element that this character has as he's just going after every bad guy that he can find.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out, is like who's the guy that did in his family? Has he already taken them out and it's just a cycle he can't stop? Like, I couldn't figure it out from the movie.
I think
Go
ahead.
The mob boss that he kills at the beginning is the one who put the hit on his family.
Okay.
I think he'd probably killed the lower level people and the 125 people that he had killed between before this movie starts. But the mob boss that gets exonerated at the beginning, he's the one that he goes after at that particular moment and takes him out along with the rest of his people.
Got it.
After nearly 5 years of appeals, Dino Moretti, reputed lieutenant of the Franco crime family, was released from prison today and acquitted of all charges in connection with the murders of police officer Frank Castle and his family. Moretti has long maintained his innocence and claims he has no idea who is responsible for the 125 mysterious gangland murders, often attributed to a shadowy figure known as the Punisher, which have occurred in this city over the last half-decade.
So yeah, let's jump into actually talking about Act 1.
That is Act 1. There you go.
Yeah. My big thing, like at the very start, we have these opening credits that I think they don't do much for me. I think most of this movie, it comes down to like The budget, I feel like, is probably pretty low. I don't think they had a lot to work with. Just the opening credits that we get, the title kind of sequence. I think they could have used a lot more exposition during the credits, because they're flashing images of various like what I interpreted to be 70s and 80s seediness, inner city kind of stuff, and a few clips of the Punisher, just firing a gun, actually clips that'll end up being later from this movie, stuff like that, which I think they could have done. Ironically, we were just talking about the Ang Lee Hulk. They did a good job, or I'm sorry, the Edward Norton Hulk. They did a good job in their opening credits of explaining the origin of the Hulk. Through flashbacks and stuff like that. I think you could have done here. Go ahead and show the execution of the family that leads to Frank Castle becoming the Punisher, and then that way it kind of just gets rid of it quickly, and then you can start your movie. And it basically does. At the start of the movie, you kind of know who the Punisher is. And they even use TV reporters to kind of fill in that exposition. And it kind of made me think, just watching the opening credits in the first few minutes, like this is a lot like RoboCop that we just covered, several months ago. It's almost the same kind of story. And I think it even begins like after you come out of the credits with TV reporters talking about, kind of what's going on. So.
Crime in Detroit.
Yeah,
it's an interesting way to kind of begin the story, because you don't get a lot of exposition with this character, and I'm a little conflicted if I like it being kind of more obscured like they left it, or if I wanted more of kind of a backstory. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I can see it going either way. I think there's an interesting element to doing it this way, just to leave it like this mysterious character, mm-hmm. which I think. In context of this guy who lives in the sewers, I think there's an element to it that works. Mm-hmm. It does require, unfortunately, kind of, as you just said, that rather expository bit from the reporters kind of setting this story up about the Punisher mm-hmm. and, all these kills that he's had and this mob boss, and is he afraid of him? And it requires a little bit of that to kind of get us into the story. And I was like, that was a little rough, the way that it was done. I can't help but think that, this was a first-time writer, Bo Ziakin wrote this, who, would later go on to write and direct a lot of other projects. But I can't help but feel that with him writing this as really kind of the first script that he did, and Mark Goldblatt, I think it was maybe his first film. I think he was more of an editor. And, or no, it was his second film after Dead Heat.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which I don't think that was probably a good testing ground for having directing qualities. But I feel like, his directing skills just didn't feel like they were there. Mm-hmm. And I feel like between the two of them being so new in their career, with a project that I feel like even at the time might have warranted maybe some better quality people, or at least some better tested people, I feel like they could have found a better way to start this.
Sure.
thing.
Yeah, because in the late 80s, when this is being made, Punisher was a big character for Marvel. He had a very popular outing, in the 70s with Spider-Man, and he popped up, along several characters, kind of a guest star kind of thing. And then, the mid 80s, when he kind of comes out with his own book, like I think it was almost an instant success, as a character by himself. So I think I prefer a Punisher movie starting out like this, because I think, thinking of the Thomas Jane Punisher movie, that movie spends like the first act is all just set up, for the death of the family. And, I think that I'm conflicted on that one, because that movie came out in the perfect time. I was, early 20s and very into that type of movie. So that one worked for me, but looking back on it, I think that's probably the weaker part of the movie. And then the Ray Stevenson movie, I feel like does kind of like this movie. There's not a lot of backstory. Like the first time you see, the Punisher, it's very early in the movie, and it's just he's already the Punisher. So I think that's the type of opening I like for a Punisher movie. I don't need a lot of Frank Castle before he loses his family type of scenes. So
yeah, it's the sort of thing that works in flashback.
Yeah. That's what I was just gonna say. I love the flashbacks in this movie.
Yeah.
Because the story, I mean, his backstory is not complicated.
No.
It's they killed my family. Done. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when the story's not that complicated, when you're not like mixing chemicals or creating some kind of compound turns you into a green monster or irradiates you, you can just say, guy got done wrong. He's out for vengeance.
Yeah.
And he goes about it in a blue-collar manner. I believe they said 125 murders in 5 years.
Yeah.
Which, if you work that out, it's about 2 bad guys every month for 5 years. So
okay,
pretty steady work.
Yeah.
I'm sure he had, bigger months than others, as most industries do. Maybe, Christmas is kind of low, and he picks back up in, say, February, March, when the weather's nicer. So,
That's an interesting point that you just brought up, that I mean he's not a superhero, right?
No.
This is a guy who really is just at least in the comics, more of kind of this war hero coming back from Vietnam, and he's just, I mean, I think he was a sharpshooter and just a tough guy, and that really is it.
Yeah.
And I think it was an interesting kind of type of character to incorporate into the Marvel universe, as far as, here's a guy who's just, he's a vigilante, and he's really just going after anyone who he sees as a criminal. And that's pretty much it. There's no superpowers. And I kind of like that about this character. And it's one of those things where I think there are elements in this film that they do kind of get right as far as that goes. And I think that speaks back to kind of what we were just saying earlier about kind of the Charles Bronson type of figures in earlier 70s films. But I think it makes for an interesting character here.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think is a little different. And when you see him confronting people like Spider-Man, because that whole thing was, he confronted Spider-Man because Spider-Man he accused of having killed Norman Osborn, and so Spider-Man was another criminal, and here he was going after him. So it's interesting kind of to put that into context of these superhero films.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look, because we just reviewed the Tim Burton Batman, and you get to see a young kid get traumatized and become a vigilante, and he dresses up like a bat. But then you get a grown man who gets traumatized and loses his family, and he goes this route. So it's kind of interesting to see, like, if you had this happen as a kid, do you go the Batman route because it's more, I don't know, kid-oriented imagination style, and then a grown adult has this happen, and he's just straight to the business and just does what he has to do.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to see the two next to each other and watching these back to back.
And that makes me wonder, where is Tommy Franco going to go at the end of this movie?
Yeah. I love the way we first start seeing him take out these mob goons in this like palatial estate after this guy gets
exonerated.
Exonerated.
Thank you. And just that type of setup is, I think, a perfect representation of the character. There's even, it reminded me of the Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon run on the Punisher, and even the Punisher Warzone movie with Ray Stevenson kind of opened the same way, where the Punisher shows up. It's a big, huge mob family all get together. It's kind of like the meeting of the five families type situation, and they're all sitting down to dinner, and then the lights go out, and suddenly they come back on, and the Punisher's just there with a machine gun and just takes them all out. And that's what they did in the comics in the mid 2000s, and then that's how they borrowed that from the Punisher Warzone movie. And I think it kind of feels like that here, where this crime boss comes home and Frank is just there. ready to take them all out. I mean, it's a much smaller scale, because there's like 5 guys maybe, but I love the way he takes them out quickly and silently, and then just blows the house to hell. and luckily the news cameras are all there to catch just the nice silhouette of him kind of in the burning doorway there. It really worked for me as an opening to the movie.
I think that element, creating like this version of the Punisher where he just goes in, takes all these guys out in record time. I mean, we're 5 and 6 minutes into the movie, right? And it's like we've already seen him take out this mafia head boss and a bunch of his goons, blow his house up. It's a great entrance to this character, I think.
So, quick question on that scene. What do you think was in the purpose of that mirrored room? I just wrote, this room would likely fail the blacklight test immediately.
Yeah.
Because that was the creepiest room I've ever seen in a movie.
That's funny. I never...
I didn't want to know what happened in that, because it was empty for the most part.
No, weird. one of the goons opens a mirrored panel, and it's like a closet.
Yeah.
So
nothing in there.
Yeah.
I don't know, weirded me out. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to go a different direction, like he was going to come out of the mirror or something. But
totally like a fun house. Like it sets it up to be like a weird fun house. Like he's going to pop up and the guy's going to shoot him, but he's not really there. And it is a weird thing because you see the reflection and it does look like it's just a big empty room. Like there's no furniture in it. It's just a mirrored closet of some sort, I guess. Yeah.
But then he just reaches down and does he stab him? It's a weird motion he does that I can't.
I know at one point.
Well, it's with his foot.
Yeah, he like attaches. Okay. Yeah, he attaches the knife to his boot.
That's
and
what
then
it was. Okay.
Like,
that's
kicks down and it kind of.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a strange decision to kind of go after the guy that way. I'm going to push my foot through this grate and knife him in the chest with my heel.
Okay, that's where I was thrown off. I got it now.
Yeah.
It just happened so quick.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump forward a little bit, just talking about once we get out of this scene and we meet Louis Gossett Jr.'s detective. I guess it's Jake Berkowitz. And he feels very routine almost as far as your grizzled partner type character. But I like what he's doing in the movie. I love him earlier kind of giving some shit to the new, or I guess it's after this. Yeah, he's giving shit to the new crime boss. He arrives at the airport and talks about him just being bait. Like that's a really great line. But kind of towards the middle of this first act, once we start getting all the drug cartels and the crime family, and then later ninjas show up at the docks.
The
Yakuza. Thank you.
It's not called ninjas, jeez.
And and this overall like revenge story, it dawned on me that I'm just watching a late 80s Timothy Dalton Bond film. And that kind of like turned it around for me. I'm like, I'm really into that idea. And as I went through this whole movie, it's like if you just swap Frank Castle's Punisher for, Timothy Dalton's James Bond and change a few elements, this is just License to Kill. It's a revenge story where Bond goes rogue and takes out this big crime cartel because they killed Felix Leiter's wife, like that sort of thing. Yeah. So it really worked for me, kind of framing it that way. And I will say, like, the things in this movie as I went through it that kind of let it down for me were the cinematography and the production design. I feel like the budget probably just didn't stretch that far. But otherwise, like story and even performance wise, I think they did a really great job.
Yeah, he even had his own cue.
That,
Shake guy.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
With the booze remote control vehicle or whatever.
Yeah. I really like Shake as a little side character.
Yeah,
I mean, if we're comparing like side characters between this film and the Thomas Jane version, I definitely prefer Shake. He's an interesting little guy. I like Barry Otto anyway. I think he's an actor who I find to be pretty interesting in kind of supporting roles. I don't see him in a ton of stuff that's just kind of not an Australian film, because I mean this film was filmed down in Australia, so they cast a lot of Australians in it. But I mean, you know, he's just one of those guys that popped up in films like Strictly Ballroom that, you know, I just found very memorable, just his performances. So yeah, he's kind of a fun little character here. An odd one, I guess, you know, this kind of alcoholic, boozy
ex
guy
theater.
Ex-theater guy who's talking in iambic pentameter as often as he can.
I love that.
Yeah.
That totally works for me. Kind of reminds me of the Jack Kirby, the demon character, the demon Etrigan. He speaks like that as well, and that it worked for me.
Yeah, it threw me off when I first heard it. I'm like, wait, is he singing? And wait, what the hell is he doing?
Yeah.
Well, it fits. It fits. I think what they did well with the idea of that character is it feels like kind of a homeless person who's slightly crazy. Mm-hmm. Like I kind of buy into that. I think there's an interesting element there, but it also feels like somebody that you would see in a comic. And I haven't read many of the Punisher comics. I don't know if some of these side characters are the types of side characters that he would end up affiliating with later in some of the later comics and stuff. But I think it still works. I think there's an element to it that does end up feeling like somebody who would end up living in one of these Marvel comic worlds.
Yeah. As far as I know, the Punisher had a few side characters throughout the years. He had Micro, who was actually portrayed in the Ray Stevenson movie by Wayne Knight. He's kind of his guy in the chair type character, usually operated out of a van and was kind of his Q, you know, provided some weapons and some technology and intel. And then in the mid to late 2000s, he had an ex-villain, the Stilt Man, was kind of working for Punisher. So,
I'm sorry, Stilt Man?
Yes, Stilt Man is a Daredevil villain, and then had a lot of run-ins with Punisher.
I guess Daredevil was taken, so that's fair.
Yeah.
Stilt Man, wow.
Yeah.
Really.
That's awesome.
Really digging to the bottom of the barrel on that one.
Yeah.
Did he have in the comics? I mean, was there a comparable character to the cop that you know? He's got Berkowitz here, who's kind of this cop who knew who he was in his past life, and you know is kind of pursuing him. Was there kind of a comparable character with that one?
I don't think there was like a long running character like that. I think he's had a few characters that would pop up throughout the years. What's his name? A Detective Soap was one, kind of a long running for a while, and then he worked alongside a character called G.W. Bridge. It was kind of his government liaison that kind of worked with him, but yeah, I don't think like this, not like an ex-partner, you know, because comic-wise, he was an ex-Vietnam vet, so he didn't really have he wasn't a cop with a partner, you know, like this, so...
Right.
I like the relationship. I like that they were ex-partners, and Louis Gossett Jr.'s Berkowitz is kind of like that. Kind of ruined him, you know, chasing down Frank these 5 years, and everyone saying he's dead, let it go. I like the idea that that's been his life, you know, his downfall, I guess.
It's an interesting character element. I mean, I've always liked Louis Gossett Jr. He's one of those guys that I wish would pop up more often, because I always found him kind of a compelling actor, or at least pop up in you know, bigger films and stuff. I know he's kind of doing a lot of TV and a lot of like smaller sorts of films that I'm probably not watching, kind of the straight to video sorts of things. But I think he's interesting here. And again, going back to kind of the script, I feel like he's an interesting character, but I also feel like he could have been written better. Like I think that they could have found ways to make him a little more compelling. It's one of those funny films where I can't help but feel like they, at the time, the studio, because what was it, New World, I think, owned Marvel at the time, and I feel like they kind of dismissed the character as another 80s action character and treated it as such, and didn't necessarily give it kind of the energy that they could have to turn it into something really, making it a more interesting, compelling psychological story of this character from the comics.
Yeah, like think about Rambo, John Rambo from Rambo First Blood. He's not an action hero at that point. He's a broken Vietnam vet. The end of that movie where he's just in tears, talking about how he came back and everything changed, and that's what this character kind of should be. And he has been, a few times throughout his history, but yeah, action star probably isn't the right route to go, but I can see why they would want to go that route, especially, looking at what action films did for people like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like they wanted that to be Dolph Lundgren, and
right.
So what do you guys think about Dolph Lundgren himself as the Punisher?
Well, his voice is perfect for it because he uses his same gravelly stoner voice that he had in Rocky. Yeah. So, I mean, it kind of fits with the brooding character, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't find it to be that off-putting or anything like that. It was just, kind of...
Yeah.
He's not I don't know for fact, but he doesn't seem like he'd be the talkative type anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think it works. And I don't know if he had a lessened dialogue because I don't know where Dolph Lundgren was at with his English. At this, I know that kind of affected some of his lines in Masters of the Universe. So I don't know if that was a factor here, but yeah, I think those factors I think help here because you do have. It's a less is more kind of thing. Like, and yeah, I think you're right. That is who Frank Castle should be. He's not chatty. He's not a that type of character anyway. So I think it works.
Yeah, he's very. It does fit the character, and that's something that I did like about him. And I think to a certain extent, I mean, Dolph Lundgren has kind of the monologues, kind of the narration at the beginning and end as he's kind of talking to himself and all of that. I think kind of work, and the way that he plays this tortured character, I think is actually pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. I think he does it pretty well. If there's any issue I have with it, it's largely the makeup job on him with the kind of that fake 5 o'clock shadow that he perpetually has that just looks like they just kind of, painted onto his face. That's kind of rough, but I largely otherwise kind of enjoy him in this role.
I do too. I think the face, the 5 o'clock shadow, I do think is an intentional attempt to make his face look more like a skull and kind of, increase the negative zones of the face, the eye sockets and the cheeks and stuff like that. So
but he did actually look pretty decent after he got injured and he was like sweating and I think it was just after he like carterized tough guy style with the knife in the flame, and he looked pretty rough and believable after that point.
Sure.
So I mean, it had its moments, but yeah, that skull-esque thing was kind of weak.
Yeah.
It was rough, but he's one of these actors who I feel like he really got set into just kind of this tough guy action mold for so long, largely because that's just where he came from. But I find him a really compelling person, and just kind of his history I think is pretty interesting. I mean, he's like just the science and everything. I mean, he's a chemical engineer. It's crazy that this guy kind of turned into this action star because he seems just like a genius otherwise. But I feel like he's one of these actors that has really grown into these sorts of films. And like, I loved seeing him in Creed 2. I thought that was a fantastic evolution of that character. And it's weird to say this, but I kind of feel like I would love to see a kind of a much older version of him now playing the Punisher.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone would ever do that, but I think that he does a good job in this character.
Sure. He could still pull it off. He was in all those Expendable movies not too long ago.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You could do a Logan style, Old Man Frank type, the Punisher's last mission type movie. I'd totally watch that.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'd finally let him wear the skull shirt, though.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know that was one thing with this movie that people like really were. I don't know if I'd say they're up in arms because I don't know how many people were actively seeking this movie out at the time. But still, it's like if there's one complaint that I read about online, it's that he never gets to wear the shirt.
Yeah.
And what about the children?
What children?
The children of the new bosses are now counted among their losses. They're being held for ransom by the Japanese.
So the bosses will have to pay up.
Pay they will, and all for naught. The children will be sold by the slave trade. They'll be bought. My God, man, don't you see? This is a result of your 5-year killing spree. You've weakened the fathers to such degrees they couldn't protect their own families.
I punish the guilty.
And as a result, the innocent now suffer.
Do we want to kind of move into Act 2? We didn't really talk about, the plot of the movie. The crime families are at war with the Yakuza, and so the Yakuza have taken all the children of the mafia, and that has led Shake to come down to the sewer, even though as far as Frank is concerned, his mission's done. And that's when Shake kind of tells him, what about the children? And of course he says, what children? And then is told that they've all been taken, and that kind of leads him into, he rides off down in the sewer, and we don't know for a fact that he's going to take action, but I think we can pretty well assume that that's his next move.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest problem with the movie is the bad guys are just so generic.
Yeah.
I don't know anything. There's like a weak attempt at backstory with Lady Tanaka, talking about her brother that she killed. But
sure.
And then the mafia is like 6 dudes. So I don't know. I thought the villains of this movie were just kind of not very well put together.
Yeah, kind of one note, maybe.
Yeah,
I liked Lady Tanaka. I thought I liked how cold and confident she was, but like that, that's all we know about her. And someone is retelling her backstory, like you said, with her brother. But she worked for me. But
I think the movie goes into they painted themselves into a corner by basically having him eliminate the villains who killed his family, like the main source of his decision to punish in the first 5 minutes of the film. Because now it's like, okay, so if that's how we're going to start, where he's basically killed those people, then the film is really then reliant on the villain, because that's what's going to actually create a story for us to care about this guy and really see him pushed to a limit where he has to kind of continue this journey. And like you're saying, unfortunately, it's not anything interesting. It's a pretty tepid kind of continuation of the mafia story from before. It's just another mafia guy comes back into town to kind of take over business because the head was killed. And that's kind of the crux of the story. It's not that exciting. And I do think that the Yakuza coming into the story is actually a really interesting element. And I think they could have done a lot with that, because I think they actually do an interesting job of establishing some memorable kind of characters, and like the henchmen, like the ballet ninja girl, whoever she is. But it's just we never get a good sense of kind of why we should care about these villains. And your hero is only as good as your villain, and I think that's one area this film does suffer.
Was there a connection between Johnny Franco and Frank's family's death? Because I thought when they do team up later, I thought that there was some line about, I'm sorry about your family, or like I didn't want that to happen. Or I guess I thought there was a bit more of a.
I mean, he's associated with the family that did it.
Yeah, maybe that's all it is.
I don't know if he had any bigger part in that.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't really tell you why you should care about this new mafia guy. That's just another random mafia guy that seems to be a big deal.
Yeah. That is an area that is. I feel like you're right. My recollection is there is a somewhat of a conversation about I'm sorry that happened, but it was so long ago, and you've already killed all these people, and what point does it stop? And I feel like they have a little bit of a conversation about it, but I don't know if it ever really. It's just not enough there, and not again, it's just not that personal connection directly to him, other than I'm just killing everybody now.
Right. Yeah. And that for me, that's kind of the Punisher that I like. Like, even if he doesn't have a personal vendetta against this specific family, he's still going to take out as much, or just flat out as much organized crime, as possible. Like, some of my favorite stories are when he would actually start to take on supervillains. He would go into the bar with no name, which is a bar in the Marvel, comic universe where the villains just get together for a drink, and no one's allowed to kill each other in this bar. It's like sanctuary. But Frank shows up and just blows the hell out of the place, because it's like easy pickings, So it's stuff like that where those characters aren't tied to his family, but it's still, he's going to wage this one man war on crime. And I don't need a connection, to his family and his mission, but
I think that's the psychological element that they deal with more, like in the TV show, at least from what I've heard, where you get kind of that psychological battle. Like, am I just basically now a serial killer?
Yeah.
I'm just killing people at random. They don't necessarily have any connection to me. Is this what I've become? And so I think that, and even the comics, I think, deal with that, where he kind of, goes through this in his head sometimes, but I don't think that this happens at all in this film. It's just, it's just kind of him killing. I mean, he has kind of the little talks at the beginning and the end, the monologues, but it's limited to that.
Yeah, and what kind of monsters is he creating with his actions? Because, I mean, like we were kind of joking about, he's killed 125 people. They each have like a couple kids. How many screwed up kids are going to come out of that after their dad gets killed by the Punisher?
Sure.
Like, what is he actually accomplishing? Like,
yeah,
it's a weird character. Like, I feel like I don't understand like what the point is, other than he's just filled with rage and maybe thinking he's doling out justice, but at what cost? So
right, yeah,
it's just
he's
a weird character. But so are we gonna go to the Scooby-Doo Funhouse Carnival?
Sure.
All right. I thoroughly enjoyed this scene.
Okay, good.
The gunmen and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like partway, like through Act 2, where, because basically he decides he is going to go save the kids, and he shoots up their casino, and then he finds out through Shake where the kids are being held, supposedly. But it turns out to be a trap, and it's. I think for me the best moment is when he's inside the funhouse, and all of a sudden, like a whole bunch of the Yakuza warriors are all going down the slides,
shooting
at him.
Yeah. That was awesome. And even the little fight sequence in that spinning platform was kind of cool. And then he gets, I don't know, it was just fun watching him fight off all these people.
Yeah.
And then just
it's a great setting for action, that funhouse. Again, kind of going back to the what let me down the most was a lot of it just felt hazy and hard to see, and I don't think that was like a style that they were going for. I think it was just a limitation on the production. So that was a bit unfortunate, but I could tell what they were going for, and it did end up still being a fun action scene. So
I guess it doesn't bother me as much just because of the era, because it kind of reminded me of Highlander. Like everything's like dark and kind of shot in a way that you can't really see as much detail. And I think that movie has like a similar vibe with like kind of like a dirty city underbelly, kind of just like dark alleys everywhere. So I guess it didn't bother me quite as much. I mean, by far the most bothersome was the makeup, but
See, I think because I was enjoying it so much that I from the performance and story wise, I thought it's just too bad that the rest of it doesn't look as good. Because then I think you could have a more beloved film, maybe. I just kind of wondered if that was what led to not being as successful as it could have been. So.
Yeah, and for me, some of that I think falls to because I kind of feel the same, where I struggle with just the look of the whole film. I just feel like the cinematography is pretty weak. I feel like, and I know, I mean, as we've said a number of times, the budget on this was a lot lower than other action films at the time, but it's directed by an editor who I think he can cut some of these sequences to good effect, but I don't think that he knew how to shoot it. And I think during some of these action scenes, I feel like, this I've seen better, and it doesn't kind of hold my interest as much. Sure. And so that's where I get a little frustrated with some of the way it plays out. For me, there were some unexpected lighter moments from Punisher, from Frank Castle. Like, once he's captured and they've got him like on the torture table, the stretching table. The rack.
Talk about a Bond moment.
See, right. They say, "Who sent you?" And I'm pretty sure his response is Batman.
Oh,
yes.
I mean, it's not it's not a funny line, but it's funny because things. Like, you don't expect that from him. You think he might just be silent. Then later on, when he steals the bus, like he stops. He lets the bus driver or best passenger, off, and kind of gives him a smile. And and there are a few moments, actually here when it gets out of this stretch table, he turns the table on the guy and gets the Dr. Death kind of torture guy on the table. He says, I don't want to stretch this out. So it's a pun that Roger Moore would be proud, and going back to this just being a Bond movie, like, so there are these moments like that where you find out that he's not like 100% grim all the time, and it works still. Like these tiny little moments of levity, I guess, that I really enjoyed.
But then he leaves the table turned on as he leaves. So.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I happened to stumble upon a happy circumstance here. Back to the Bond similarities. The name of the detective, the woman, Sam Leary, her real name is Nancy Everhard. So another Bond tie-in. That's weird.
Yeah.
It just popped out at me. Oh, gross.
Jeez.
That's what happens
so
when I read a dirty name.
Yeah.
But that is weird that you were saying that, and I just saw that. I think this movie is a Bond film now. Officially.
Yeah. She's an interesting character because I like the way she just thrusts herself into the story by like telling Jake, like, I'm your new partner kind of situation, and I believe you about the Punisher and all that. And then once at the end of Act 2 here, once they have the accident during the, I guess, prisoner transfer rescue / kidnapping, like she just then disappears. Like she's not in the rest of the movie.
Right.
And I found out later, like there's a deleted scene where Jake visits the hospital and basically tells her like, you know, you done good, kid. You know, I am gonna get back into this case and go after Frank, because the scene before that, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about, is the scene between Jake and the Punisher at jail. Like he washes his hands of it. He's done, walks away. But then by the end of the next scene, I guess that would have been there is him saying he's back in. So
she's essentially their therapist.
Kind of, yeah.
You're right.
To talk about why he's after the Punisher and Frank and all that, and then she gets Frank to ask, you know, sort of realize that he needs help, but then, you know, shenanigans ensue and that doesn't work out. But essentially, she's the one bringing their two stories together and letting us know what's going on.
Sure.
Because without her in that sewer scene, like talking with Jake, you don't realize that, you know, he had issues that Frank helped him with, and now he's on a mission to help Frank. So you don't get that without her in that scene.
Mm-hmm.
So she's kind of the reason I even care about the character Jake.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, you need that conversation with him to get any of his backstory. So to that end, she does just kind of become the you know, the backstory character, just giving us that bit. And you know, I mean, it kind of works. I think I think that there's enough of her there, but because of the way that they cut the film together, you just don't get any resolution with her, and so it does end up feeling, because I don't think in the sewer it never goes anywhere, right? Like she comes up with the whole idea that it's the sewer, and you know, after 5 years of Berkowitz looking and never thinking of that, and then she of course comes up with it after, you know, 5 minutes sitting at her computer. But then that was kind of it.
Yeah, that was kind of one of my next notes, and I think it could have easily been rewritten as, you know, and you have to forgive like the time it would take to get from place to place. But I think if Frank and Shake had left this torture room, you know, Shake kind of goes off on his own. I think if you send Shake down into the sewer as just he's gonna go to Frank's place just to hide because all this had just happened, and Shake bumps into Jake and Sam, then have him kind of be the one saying, you know, Frank is you know, in this building, he's taking on the Yakuza, and that's what ends up, you know, if that leads to Jake having a standoff with Frank at the bus once Frank gets all the kids off the bus, you know, and he's faced with a line of cops. I think if you get Jake there and he's the one that convinces Frank to like have him be the one that convinces Frank to come with him and let himself get, you know, taken by the police, like I think that could be more of an emotional scene between those two, like, because with Jake and Sam down in the sewer, like they don't learn anything other than having a moment for some good conversation. But I think if you found a way to get Jake to that bus scene, I think that'd be more impactful than him just showing up at the jail once they've already taken him. I mean, because they do have a great conversation in the jail. Like that scene between those two is fantastic, but I think you could blend that with him getting off the bus, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of expected that and didn't actually get it. So I totally get that.
It almost feels like the film just forgets that they are down in the sewer, and either there's some cut footage that didn't quite work, or there's some reason, and maybe it's just we need them distracted and over here so that I don't know. It just kind of feels like, like I said, like they were just forgotten over there.
Yeah, it feels like definitely one of those stories of a film that went through a lot of re-edits for whatever reason. Because it just feels, some of it just feels like the story gets pretty sloppy. Like I feel like there's probably an extra half hour laying on the ground somewhere.
There could be.
They could have tied these stories together. I'd be interested in looking at the script for this to see if all of that was in there.
Yeah.
So, Act 3?
I think so, unless you guys have anything else from Act 2. I mean,
the only other note I had was the the crazy the use of earrings when the Yakuza comes into the restaurant, and all the restaurant patrons are their assassins. Yeah. And then 2, this is where we learned kind of exactly how this deaf ballerina assassin that Lady Tanaka has, where she throws her earrings and pins the guy to the wall.
I really like that setup with she takes all of them out because of what they had drank, and I enjoyed that scene. But it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, her earrings being able to pin someone to the wall.
It's pretty cheesy 80s material. And there's only she kills about 5 guys here, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And so, am I to understand that between these 5 guys plus Franco, that all of the kids are theirs, or is that including all of their like?
Yeah, I think these are like lieutenants, and Franco obviously is the head, and then I think it's the guys that worked for these guys. So yeah, I think it's not just these 5 people. I think, yeah.
This is a weirdly toned film, I find, because you throw these kids in, I'm assuming to, allow for some empathy for our protagonist. And, but like all of their parents just got killed. Yeah. It's a strange film as far as the tone. You involve kids and it becomes like this save the kids kind of happy moment, but the rest of it is just so dark. It's just like, God, it's such an odd tone for a film.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that. I didn't even consider the fact that they're going to find out that all their fathers are all dead.
Right. And Tommy's the one toward the end of the film who does get, a word of advice from the Punisher. Grow up smart, be good. But all these other kids, I mean, they might end up at the end of his gun down the road.
Of course, a lot of them didn't know that their family was in crime, I think, or was it?
At least Tommy didn't.
Or maybe they all knew, but Tommy didn't know, or something like that. So,
right.
What happened to your family wasn't supposed to. If I could undo it, I would, but I can't. I swear this on the life of my son, Thomas Anthony. I want him back. I can't do it myself, or I would. I need you, Castle. I'll give you anything you want. I'll do anything you wish. Say something.
Fuck you.
This is where he's now teamed up with Franco, who rescues him from his having been arrested. And because Franco, of all the kids who didn't get rescued, it was his own child who is stuck with the Yakuza. And so the two of them now team up to go after them, with Shake, of course, as an assistant.
Sure.
So do you guys assume that if Tommy got out, he would have just left the other kids for dead? Franco?
Probably.
I mean, he knows that the guys that he had died, and then he's like, who cares about the kids? I got Tommy. He's got cool magic tricks.
Right. I don't think he's the sort of guy who cares. Right.
I was just thinking about that, like while they were going on their revenge tour, not revenge tour, but rescue tour. I was like, would he have cared this much if it was the other guy's kids? And I don't think he would have.
Sure.
Yeah, even if the other guys didn't get killed, I question if he would pursue them.
Yeah.
Right.
I think he would just write them off and just use that or use it as an excuse to go after the Yakuza and try to just take them all out anyway.
Use it as fuel for the fire, I guess.
Right.
For, retaliation. Yeah.
So Jake gets kidnapped conveniently for the story to move forward.
Right. That's another deleted scene as he's leaving the hospital. Or I guess it's the end of that deleted scene where he's talking with Sam. He leaves the hospital, gets in his car, and of course there's someone in his back seat, puts a gun to his head, and then that's how we know that he's been taken. But probably not necessary to see that. I think it's more of the hospital scene is the big chunk, but
yeah.
For some reason, I expected it to be Sam because Sam and Frank were together in that armored car. So it seems like she would be the obvious choice to have been taken. I mean, emotionally, it makes sense that it's Jake.
Well, and I think it ends up leaving the question in your head because you never see what happens to Sam. The way that the film is played, it makes you feel like, okay, so did Franco and his men, when they pull Frank out, do they kill her? Do they leave her for dead? Like, what happened to her?
Right.
So it's odd the way that element is kind of left hanging. But you're right. It makes a lot more sense for it to be Jake. And then they go off on their little journey. And it's one of these things where watching Jake, I couldn't help but roll my eyes when it's the whole, I've got to take a leak. What am I going to do? I don't have any hands. Are you going to do it for me? It's like, oh, boy, this is just so typical.
I'd like to know what he would have done if the guy said, yeah, I'll take care of it. Like,
right. But I do love where he hits the guy that's bringing the pizza in, and he actually just takes a slice and walks out. Like, that's fun. It's totally minor and may have just been improv,
Right.
But I like that.
It was a good little moment.
I liked Shake setting off the explosive and his subsequent leaving. It was like obviously shooken up, ironically, but it was just a good way to leave a scene for him.
Yeah, and I kept thinking that, obviously if the plan worked perfectly, he would have hit both buttons, no problem. I think I assumed, because Frank says in response to what does the second button do, he says it'll blow everything else. So I assumed that meant, you hit button number 1 in 5 minutes, and then you get out of the building, and then you hit button number 2 after 15 minutes, because that's going to bring the whole building down. So leading up to that, and they amp up the tension because Shake drops the remote down this little grate and has to hit the button with at first the knife, and then he shoots it. But I thought that was building to a sacrifice, that Shake was going to be trapped in the building and push it and then be killed.
Yeah.
I thought that's a nice emotional, I love a good emotional sacrifice scene, self-sacrifice type thing. So it totally would have worked for me. And then we find out it just kind of blows the panel for the elevators. Or what was the first?
The first one knocks all the lights out.
Okay.
Like they're in the hallway.
Yeah.
And they see the guys come running around, and then knocks the lights out. That's and then a few seconds of black for Frank and Franco to hide. And then all the kind of, I guess it's just emergency lights, kind of, because all of a sudden it's just all red.
Yeah. So the second explosion is meant to be the elevators, which kind of a letdown when Frank says, it's going to blow everything else.
Yeah, right. It doesn't do much.
I kind of feel like we're robbed of a big heroic moment for Shake almost. But I'm not, wishing the character was killed. I think the movie kind of set that up for me because it came down to Frank's counting on me. I have to get this done, and if that means my life, then so be it.
It's one of those things where they end up. He just becomes kind of like a joke character, and I think there were elements of him that I think worked better, like when he's captured and he's being used as a torture device with Frank, and I think there are some interesting elements to him. But at this point, when as soon as he's sitting there reading the paper and he knocks the thing over, I'm like, okay, now they're just using him for a joke just to have to deal with this. And it gets a little stupid. I mean, the sword, and then he takes the gun and he shoots it. I'm like, okay, that could also just completely destroy the unit, and it's not going to actually do any good. So,
because I feel like the knife trick worked the first time, and did he drop the knife too? Like, why not use the knife the second time?
Yeah, right.
That felt weird, but
does feel really weird. And then he kind of runs off, and that's the end of him as a character. He pops up, bumps into Jake, and disappears. And then Jake kind of looks at him like, oh, wait a minute. He left a Punisher knife behind.
Right.
What's going on?
Yeah, so clearly he had the knife still. So
yeah, right.
I don't know.
It's an odd, the way that the whole thing plays out. I feel like they just needed to do it to allow for the red lighting, which is cool. I really like the red lighting. And then to kind of keep the cops from getting up there quicker by blowing the elevator. And that was kind of all that was really used for. And I feel like they could have done all of that in a much cleaner way.
Yeah. Let's see. Definitely want to talk about I like that red lit, entire action sequence, just shooting up the bad guys and then taking them on more, hand to hand for Frank. And that whole sequence was really good, and I love how it builds to this tense moment between Franco and Frank.
Yeah, it was like 3 solid fights in a row. Like the weapon room, and then the lady assassin, and Lady Tanaka's was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
There was a lot of action. I didn't take a whole lot of notes because I was just like watching.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I did. It's kind of same here.
It is fun, and I do like you said, they give you a few different things. You have Frank and when the 2 guys come in and they're shooting everything up, and then of course it's just kind of duels with some individual guys as they're doing stuff in the knife room, and then yes, it's that lady assassin as she's jumping around and kicking and awesome. It's all gorgeous. I really like all of that stuff. I think it all works really well to great effect for this film. And I think that's one of the strengths of the end of the film is just building to some interesting moments here that all look pretty good. And I considering the way some of the other stuff was directed earlier in the film, I feel like this actually, they came up with some good ideas for it, and it works pretty well. And it builds to kind of a really just a dark, an absurdly dark kind of end for this film, especially involving a kid, where you've got the dad and the boy, and it's like, geez, the stuff that Lady Tanaka is doing with this whole thing is just crazy dark.
Yeah, I assume that child actor has been traumatized beyond belief. There's some heavy stuff going on.
Yeah,
watch your dad blow his own head off.
Oh, man.
It's like
jeez.
It's super tense, and I love that it comes down to just a fight between these two, and it's believable for me that Franco can, kind of get the better of Frank in this moment. I mean, he's had, Punisher, he's, like we said, he's not a superhero. Yeah. And so it's been several days of this conflict where he's tired. He's been injured. He takes advantage of the knife wound that he gets from the daughter, Lady Tanaka's daughter. She gets him in the leg, so Franco's able to exploit that. And so it's believable that these two characters are kind of an even match, I guess. And I had to pause it at one point because it was getting so tense, and I was like trying to write my notes and just I couldn't remember how it played out. For some reason I thought, that Tommy got the gun and actually killed his father to stop him from killing Frank, So it was really exciting just how this end came about.
Yeah, to the end I always have issues with that who got shot when they're wrestling around with a gun. I always hated that.
Sure.
Yeah, quite the trope.
I did like him getting shot and forgetting he had body armor on. Like when Frank shot him.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, crap.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of cool. But yeah, I've always hated the wrestling around and then who got shot? Oh, yeah, we already know.
Right.
It's always the same person.
Right.
But
it's such a strange tone for it. And it's weird because you see Tommy coming in and seeing this whole thing, and then grabbing the gun, and it's like, wow, this is.
Yeah, and then
where is this film going?
Do it, kid! Shoot me in the head.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, it's an incredible standoff with him and Tommy. That I think I'd forgotten most of that, and I didn't see it coming this time, and it's powerful.
Yeah, when he kneels in front of Tommy, who's upset at him for having killed his father, and he puts the gun on his head and just like, do it. Yeah. And I mean, it's actually a pretty good performance from this kid actor, which I was pretty impressed with. I think that there's an interesting element here of kind of what the Punisher's about, it's this whole idea of, you can't let this darkness consume you sort of thing, even though it's consumed me.
Yeah.
But just the way that it kind of resolves with this kid, it's so dark, but it's actually kind of an interesting little ending. So I think that this last act has some pretty interesting elements in it.
Absolutely. It's kind of where my notes stop. There's a little bit more, really just Jake, yelling after Frank from the top of this building.
That was a weird ending.
Yeah.
And
then we get the last bit of voiceover and zooming through the sewers. Yeah. It lets us know that I think the guilty need to be punished, as Frank says, and that the idea that he's gonna still be there. I like how this ends with just the Punisher's not done yet. So
yeah.
All right, the punishment is over.
So let's jump into our most villainous. What do you guys have for what the most villainous moment?
This planet, these people, they are nothing to me.
You were made to be ruled.
The universe's power! You unstoppable power! Come to me, son of Jor-El! Kneel before Zod! And I am that force! I am that power!
In the end, you will always kneel.
Kneel before your master!
I mean, it has to be the ending for me. It's that specifically the moment with Lady Tanaka where she has the knife to Tommy's throat and she tells Dad, "Put the gun in your mouth and shoot yourself.
Yeah.
Let your kid watch it. That's how I'll let him live." It's like, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
And actually, just as a side note, there was an actual interesting moment of cinematography with that, where it's actually shot almost as a POV, because you have the two characters looking directly into the lens, and then the camera like moves around, like it's his POV watching her, but then the camera moves, or all of a sudden it becomes just a camera, and it moves around her and becomes her POV as she's watching him. It's like,
yeah. I think that was the disturbing part, because she was just so into it.
Yeah. It felt weird seeing them just staring straight down the barrel and all that. But
right,
that is by far that is it.
Especially with her kind of that. The face painting that she has too, because she ends up looking like this terrifying death clown.
Yeah. Mine kind of felt like a cheat. I mean, initially I wanted to say, the killing of Frank Castle's family. So I don't know that I can really go with that one, because that's kind of the setup for the character itself. So for me, I'm going to go with Franco here at the end, just planning to kill Frank, because even though they just rescued his son, he's going to turn on him and go ahead and kill him. That was.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Frank said that he was going to kill him after they were done anyway. So
yeah, but it's kind of like they've not bonded, but they've had this this time together, and at one point even Franco shoots somebody, does kind of that trope of like aiming the gun at Frank and shooting someone just to the side of him, or however. So
okay,
that works.
I think I was going to go with Lady Tanaka again, with just her plan with the children to take the money and then put them into slave trade.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay. And
that works.
Yeah. Slave children don't have a great, that's not a great outcome for them, unfortunately. No, so I thought that was pretty dark as well.
Yeah. It's very dark.
And I guess I got the impression that that's Lady Tanaka's daughter was probably somehow a similar type of arrangement. Like she had taken her as a child from somebody and raised her as her own, I imagine is.
I can see that.
Yeah. So let's jump over to heroic, and I'm definitely interested to see what you guys got for most heroic.
I believe there's a hero in all of us.
I just finally know what I have to do.
That keeps us honest.
I'm here to fight for truth and justice in the American way.
Gives us strength.
You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards.
Makes us noble.
And I know in my heart that it's right.
It's an interesting thing to kind of look at in context of a film like this, because it's like, he's killing villains, but it's such a vigilante sort of thing. So is it really heroic? Like, what's heroic? And so for me, it does end up being the thing that I think might feel maybe the least kind of for a Frank Castle type of character, but it is when he rescues the kids. Okay. That, to me, I think ends up working, particularly when he goes back to, save the two that got left behind. It just feels like the sort of thing that, a real hero would do.
Right on. Patrick?
I'm going to go with my man Tommy.
Nice.
He's the one that sort of saved Punisher to let him escape with the rest of the kids. And he kind of puts up a fight with his own dad trying to stop him from, attacking Castle as well. So I kind of want to give him a honorary mention there as a heroic.
Cool. Yeah.
Nice.
Mine was kind of there in that bus rescue sequence as well, but at the end of it, sacrificing himself up to the police to bring these kids to safety. Yeah. So
nice.
Yeah. Well, cool. Why don't we go around and give our 5, out of 5-star rating and just overall thoughts, final thoughts on the movie?
This is a film when I first watched it, I'm like, it can't be higher than a 1 star. It's so badly done. But on rewatch, I'm like, okay, it's probably a 2-star film. I think it's a little higher than I initially gave it credit for, because I think there are some really interesting elements throughout it. I can't say it's a good movie, but it is an entertaining movie, and I could actually see myself watching it again, which I'm kind of surprised to say, but I'm like, there's some interesting elements with it. So I'd say 2-star, but it is probably kind of more enjoyable to watch than you'd think.
Now, okay. Is it rewatchable in a sense that you want to get a higher definition TV so you can see in the dark? Is that what you mean by rewatchable?
Maybe not quite.
Okay, just checking. But I'm in the same boat. I put it at a 2 because, like you said, it's not a good movie by any means. It's like I just didn't find myself caught up in the Lady Tanaka storyline or even the Franco storyline. I was just like, I don't really care. I would have been more tied in to the boss up front that got whacked by the Punisher. I think I would have been more interested in his, plans to get back at the guy that was the root of everything, to see how that all unfolded, whereas this movie sort of paints it as just another guy he had to kill. And the action was, enjoyable, and Shake, awesome dude. I thoroughly enjoyed him chasing after the booze controlled, remote control booze thing. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, okay, this guy just really needs his booze because that's an obvious trap. Right. It was like Wile E. Coyote-esque. But
totally.
But yeah, it's not great, but I'm glad I got to see it at least. I probably won't watch it again, but it was interesting seeing Dolph again. So I'll give it 2.
Right on. Well, I'm despite what you guys say about this not being a good movie, I think it is a good movie.
Oh my gosh.
I think like the first thing I wrote down after, actually once the credits start rolling was I just found my new favorite Punisher movie. And it doesn't have, I guess the competition is not, that strong. But I was just blown away at how much I enjoyed the movie. Like I said, the cinematography and production design, I think, aren't doing it many favors. But I really liked Dolph Lundgren's performance as Frank Castle because I think either he lucked into it by his limitations as an actor, or he chose to play it this way. Either way, I think he did a great job of bringing the Punisher to life, because I think character-wise, I think he just nailed it. That is, when I read the Punisher, he's not far off from what we see here. Direction and tone of the movie, I think, are pretty good. I mean, more of the tone more than direction, because, like I said, it is kind of a early outing for a second time director, but I do think they get the tone right, and I like the way they kept the movie simple, because again, that feels like Frank Castle. It feels like the Punisher to me. So
yeah.
And comparing, like I said earlier, to the Thomas Jane Punisher film, that movie tries too hard, I think, with the origin, and this one, I think, gets it just perfect, right off the bat, and like I said, keeping it simple, and going back to what I said, like this, it felt like a James Bond movie the whole time, and that elevated it for me. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this movie, so I'm giving it a 3.5.
Wow.
All around, that brings it to a 2.5 overall for all three of us. And yeah, I probably won't watch this again anytime soon, but I will definitely watch this again in the future. So,
well, look at that.
It's okay to be wrong sometimes, Travis. I like that.
Yeah,
confidence you got there.
It was just a very surprising movie. So
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, remind me never to listen to your recommendations ever again.
No worries. Yeah. Andy, again, we can't thank you enough for joining us, and please tell us all about the next reel and your Marvel Movie Minute projects.
Absolutely, yeah. The Next Reel is a film podcast. We've been talking about movies since 2011. And, just each week we look at a movie and we talk about it in incredible detail. And we usually build them in different series. Right now we're doing a Robin Hood series at the time we're recording this, looking at a bunch of different Robin Hood films. And so that's a good opportunity for us to get together and talk movies, and just kind of like the conversation we had here, just kind of dig into a particular film. And the other podcast that we do is Marvel Movie Minute, where, as we said earlier in this show, we talk about the Marvel films 1 minute at a time. And so season 1 with Iron Man from 2008 is fully complete and available at marvelmovieminute.com or on your podcaster of choice. And we are beginning our hiatus episodes looking at some of the Hulk TV movies and Ang Lee's film before we kick in January 2020 with the season for The Incredible Hulk from Louis Leterrier. So
very cool.
Yeah,
really, really enjoy the Iron Man. Going through Iron Man. I'm around the time where Stain kind of turns on Raza, and
oh yes,
takes him out and takes the original Iron Man armor for himself. So
right.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun going through that movie with you guys.
It's a fun one. Thanks. I'm glad to hear you're tuning in.
Well, cool. I think that's probably going to do it for this. So we can let you go and so you can start making some pancakes.
That's right. It's pancake time.
That's going to do it for this one. We will be back next episode with Back to the Future 2. Until then, you can find us over on Twitter at Real Comic Heroes, and you can join the Facebook group, the Real Comic Heroes League of Citizens, and talk about this movie and any future movies that we've covered. So until then, stay safe, citizens. Hey, citizens, we had to kind of wrap up the show a little quicker than normal. We got started a little late, and we had a firm time to keep with our guest before he had to go, so I didn't want to throw too much at the end there as far as wrap-up stuff. I mean, we did the heroic and villainous stuff, of course, with the movie itself, but I do have some comments and thoughts about Punisher that came in mostly through Facebook that I wanted to share, but we didn't really have time to share while we had Andy. I didn't want to keep him any later than we had promised. So I'm going to run through these. Patrick is not with me right now. He had to run as well. And so I'm just going to go through these and give shout outs to the people that sent this stuff in. And yeah. So first we have from Michael Tanner, who is a frequent guest on the Grind Bin. Michael says, "My friends and I would quote this movie all the time. You're guilty, you're dead." And Lady Tanaka saying, "While your ancestors were still screwing sheep on the Mediterranean coast." Michael says those are some of his favorites. So we have from Bryon Lockheart from over on the Real Comic Heroes League of Citizens Facebook page. Byron says, "Love this movie, only wish he had the skull." We definitely talked about the skull kind of being a presence, of course, on the knife itself, and being absent from kind of his costuming, So I'm not really sure why they chose to keep the skull theme out of it as much as they did, but thank you, Byron. And we have from another movies group on Facebook, we have from Samuel Holloway. Samuel says, "I still say this is the best Punisher film we have to date." I would agree with you, Samuel. He says, "First Netflix season is best all around on screen, but this is the best film. Whether intentional or not, Lundgren's portrayal for me is more affecting and true to the character than its successors. His Punisher is creepy and does a great job exploring the aspect of Frank Castle that is, well, no longer really Frank Castle. This is the Punisher, and whatever humanity Castle possessed went into the ground with his family. This is a remorseless killing machine, a force of nature, a fury that is more an idea than a man, unkillable because he is already dead. Maybe that was an acting choice, or maybe Lundgren is so wooden that his dead eyes come across as intentionally soulless. But either way, it works for me." Again, that was from Samuel Holloway. So thanks to those gentlemen who sent in those thoughts. Definitely appreciate that. So back when we discussed the other Dolph Lundgren film that we've discussed over the past few months, Masters of the Universe, we had on Sean Malloy from the I Must Break This podcast. Sean goes through the entire film catalog of Dolph Lundgren chronologically, kind of like how we do with comic book movies. So he has already talked about The Punisher, and I highly recommend it. It's a great episode to go listen to. His guest on that episode was a gentleman named Jérémie Damoiseau. Jérémie is he's been sort of Dolph Lundgren's biographer, going through his films and been very involved in the works of Dolph Lundgren, and he has written a book. It's about the history of the 1989 Punisher. He's released it in French, and then I think he is currently working on putting out an English version of that book. So I've been talking with Jérémie, and he has sent us an excerpt of the introduction of his book that hopefully will be coming soon. I definitely will. We will share that, when that book becomes available, and definitely promote it. But for now, I've already recorded myself reading through the introduction that he sent us, so I'll tack that on after this. But thank you to Jérémie for sending in that. It's a great insight into someone who was anticipating this film. So far we've, during this episode, we talked a lot about watching this movie, well after it has been out, and kind of where it stands now in the history of film. But this little look into the book that Jérémie is putting together is more from the perspective of someone remembering being excited for this movie when it was about to come out, and kind of the where it went after that. So I will I will drop that in here, and then after that, you will get the trailer for our next review, which will be Back to the Future 2, and the closing theme of the show. The Punisher, The Untold Story of the '89 Cult Classic, by Jérémie Damoiseau. Excerpt from the introduction. Being aware of the Punisher project since its early announcement during the summer of 1988, I was privileged to follow and anticipate the arrival of the comic book film adaptation well in advance. At a time far anterior to the internet craze of movie news consumption era, I was then able to catch and read attentively all the well-informed French genre film magazines that covered the somewhat anticipated comic book movie over the entire year preceding its national theatrical release. Finally, on Thursday, October 26, 1988, I managed to see The Punisher on the big screen the day that followed its release. Despite the fact that the rather intense and violent film was restricted under the age of 13, and I was only age 10 going 11, I went back to the same theater to watch the film 3 more times over the next month. When it was over, The Punisher left quite a mark on me, and I didn't really want to come back to reality. The downbeat ending, the mob boss's kid pointing a gun at the Punisher's face, Frank's infamous line, "Grow up to be a good man, because if not, I'll be waiting," and Louis Gossett Jr.'s heartfelt scream from the top of the Yakuza skyscraper, underscored by Dennis Dreith's melancholic score, all converged to a unique emotion I had not felt from a film before. I wasn't disturbed, just somewhat moved, the same way you get when you hear a really good, truthful, sad song. Therefore, needless to say that The Punisher made a strong impression on the precocious kid and growing cinephile that I was. Looking back, it was the darkest and most violent feature film that I had been given to see until then. It was also the most intriguingly melancholic and fascinating. Both derided and adulated, dismissed and forgotten between the mid-1990s and early 2000s, this first motion picture adaptation of a character born at Marvel 45 years ago rises well above the mediocrity and campiness that can be labeled on it. Occasionally considered little spectacular or not mainstream enough, especially next to Tim Burton's Batman, the other '89 comic book film, The Punisher possesses a singular touch of retro style and tone that recalls the 1970s exploitation cinema more than the '80s. It's not exactly Commando, 1985, or Rambo 3, 1988, and Dolph Lundgren doesn't have to be the oiled, tanned, and shirtless hero here. Frank Castle is a tormented, sleep-deprived anti-hero that wears black, heavy leather, and doesn't play the heroic, patriotic savior. Granted, it's an action picture that is made in the 80s, and you can see it as a product of its time. Yet, The Punisher was shot and conceived like a neo-noir film, a hybrid of B-movies and grindhouse cinema standing at the crossroads of the Italian, Japanese, and Australian exploitation genres. These artistic choices were the director, Mark Goldblatt's, an Oscar-nominated editor making with The Punisher his sophomore directorial effort after the zombie action comedy Dead Heat, 1988. Goldblatt was the regular editor of Joe Dante and James Cameron, and went on to work steadily for Paul Verhoeven, Michael Bay, as well as producers Joel Silver and Mario Casar. By the time of The Punisher, the editor's career highlights already included the action sci-fi films The Terminator, Rambo, First Blood Part 2, Commando, as well as directing Second Unit on RoboCop. Additionally, The Punisher turned out to become one of Dolph Lundgren's most emblematic and fan-favorite roles, even today. In 1988-89, Lundgren was a rising action star at the dawn of a light-speed film career since Rocky IV and Masters of the Universe, followed by Red Scorpion, which had not been released nor completed when The Punisher came out. 2 years after playing Mattel's hugely successful action figure He-Man on the screen, the giant Swede found in Marvel's Frank Castle a dark, ambivalent character role that Lundgren occasionally described as a cross between Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Before its release, the filmmakers projected The Punisher as a potential hit that could propel Dolph Lundgren's action stardom the same way the Terminator did for Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, the Marvel character's celluloid adaptation did not meet with anticipated success. The Punisher performed so-so in Europe, and moreover, the film was plagued by the cancellation of a domestic release in theaters, ending up straight to video a couple years later in 1991, while a majority of comic fans and audiences seemed less than impressed. Whilst The Terminator worked well as a robot in a science fiction realm, Dolph Lundgren's Punisher portrayal depicted a neurotic antihero in a contemporary world. The character was perhaps not likable, heroic, or patriotic enough to make audiences and action fans cheer for him in this end of the Reagan era, especially since Lundgren would forever be stigmatized as the cold boxing machine Ivan Drago, and he was not perceived favorably as a hero or leading star to draw people to theaters despite his potential. In the meantime, while The Punisher was in production, the soon-to-be action stars Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal emerged with their breakthrough title movies Bloodsport and Above the Law. Van Damme and Seagal's martial arts skills and exhibitions seemed to match the expectations of target audiences way better than Lundgren's. Firstly, Dolph Lundgren had arrived to the scene years after his bodybuilded elders Sylvester Stallone and Schwarzenegger, who both embodied and shaped the face of action cinema in the 1980s. Secondly, and notwithstanding being a genuine European and Australian champion in Kyokushinkai karate himself, Lundgren voluntarily avoided following the martial arts footsteps of his contemporaries, Van Damme and Seagal. Both of these factors seem to explain the Swede's lack of a distinct identity or recognizable trademark that would click with audiences. In the roles that naturally appealed to Dolph Lundgren was a recurrent dark side and ambiguity that were manifest in both Red Scorpion and this Punisher. Both films were at the same typical and yet in the margins of their time. The same could be alleged to some of Lundgren's best yet lesser-known underrated films, The Anti-Imperialist Men of War, 1984, written by the acclaimed independent filmmaker activist John Sayles, the existentialist nihilistic Silent Trigger, 1996, from Esthete Russell Mulcahy, or even the minimalistic thriller Jill Rips, aka Jill Ripper, 1999, helmed by horror artisan Anthony Hickok, based on the late Scottish author Frederick Lindsay's noir novel. From Universal Soldier, 1992, to Johnny Mnemonics, 1995, based on William Gibson's short story, to The Expendables, 2010, Dolph Lundgren has always demonstrated great affection for the wicked, lunatic, and colorful characters, which felt more satisfying and fun for him to play than the all-clean, monolithic heroes. Neurotic, psychotic, mystic crusader, the character of the Punisher fitted right in the middle of the good guy, bad guy spectrum. Released in theaters worldwide, but without much of a box office draw, and then straight to home video in North America, The Punisher was a rather big seller on VHS tape. Mark Goldblatt's film actually proved over the years that it had a strong cult following. It made an impact on individuals who had mostly caught the film on VHS or television and had grown up with it. Somehow, the disappointingly received 2004 Punisher big screen reboot starring Thomas Jane and John Travolta, and to an extent, the 2008 Punisher Warzone contributed to rehabilitate the 1989 original motion picture adaptation. Debunking urban legends and preconceived ideas, The Punisher, the untold story of the 1989 cult classic, chronicles the history of the film throughout the production process of making the film, including rare facts and never-published anecdotes collected from the filmmakers as well as some of the comic book authors. The book narrates intertwined tales about the Punisher character, Dolph Lundgren's early career, as well as the company's Marvel Comics and New World Pictures true testimonies of a bygone era. Now let's time travel to the late 80s to revisit the genesis of this rare gem, or UFO, unidentified filmic object that is The Punisher, 1989.
Do you remember the future?
You've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future.
Are we back?
We're back.
What do you mean we're in the future?
October 21st, 2015.
Marty, we're going to be able to see our wedding.
Wow. The future. I gotta check this out, Doc.
Look what happens to your son.
He's a complete wimp.
Don't talk to anyone. You've been looking.
Don't touch anything.
I need to borrow your hoverboard.
And try not to look at anything. I didn't invent the time machine to win at gambling.
I can't lose.
I invented a time machine to travel through time.
Hey, Doc, I'm all for that. What's wrong with making a few bucks on the side?
Now,
the time continuum has been disrupted, creating an alternate 1985.
there have been a few changes.
It's like we're in hell or something.
No, it's Hill Valley, although I can't imagine hell being much worse.
But they'll all be back.
Eat less, slackers!
Biff?
Hello? Hello? Anybody home?
Mom, that can't be you. You're so big.
Michael J. Fox. Christopher Lloyd. Michael J. Fox.
More like a couple of teenagers, you know?
And Michael J. Fox.
Mom, is that you?
Steven Spielberg presents a Robert Zemeckis film, Back to the Future, Part 2. Coming November 22nd to theaters everywhere.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Find the show on Facebook and Twitter at Real Comic Heroes. All music and audio are the property of their respective creators.